Okay, welcome back. Hi there, welcome back. As you can see, a lot of work has occurred since our last visit. We've included an anteater, a sloth, some cats, some ocelots, some flowers, and a figure, two figures in that order. And what I'd like to do is backtrack a little and show you how each of these stages was completed. We're going to start with the anteater, which is called a Tamandua. And the reason this is here, all these little characters are here, and we've deviated from Rousseau, is I wanted to personalize it. So my daughter, my wife, wanted different kind of features to occur within the painting, myself included. I wanted to see certain things as well. And so we included the things that we thought were of interest to us, just to personalize the artwork a little bit more. So now we're going to scoot across to the fill-in. There we are. And hopefully we are going to see how this is created. Okay, from the start. Here we are. We're looking at a Tamandua, and it's to occupy the upper left quadrant. Here I'm showing you the Tamandua, and I did a Google search for this kind of anteater and discovered that it looks as if it's wearing a dark tank top, and it's got a lovely, light head, coat hanger head with a grey muzzle, and this kind of black tank top that it's wearing. So it's very, very a curious animal. So I decided to start with the muzzle, and if we look closely at the palette cam, I tried to mix up a grey just using carbon black and titanium white. And you know that I keep saying that zinc white is a much better white for mixing colours with, as titanium white is very, very strong and you have to be careful with the mixes. And so I decided to start on the muzzle first of all. So the hair of the Tamandua anteater, especially around the muzzle, is short. And what I tried to do is, with this rigger brush from Rosemary and Co, and I'm not sponsored by them, I tried to make a very light mix of carbon black and titanium white to make a kind of mid-grey. And so what I'm doing here is I'm trying to build up, first of all, the shape of the muzzle and the head. I'm trying to correct some drawing mistakes, but I'm building in these velvety hair structures with short dabbing strokes, because I feel that that is the way to build in that kind of texture. That the hair round about the muzzle is very, very short. I'm having to build this up a little bit because, as you can see, the leaves in the background are actually showing through. And if you take a close study of Rousseau's work, you can see that this is an example of how he built up in layers. And so I feel fairly satisfied that I'm working in a way that's fairly congruent with the way that Rousseau would have been working, building up a layer, adding details on top. Now, the paint is deliciously opaque. This Winsor and Newton water mixable oils is what I'm using. So I'll go over to the palette. Those of you that are sharp-eyed will see that I've changed from using a glass palette to a greaseproof paper one, and that's for convenience for me. It's an energy-saving strategy. I've gone into neat carbon black there from the palette, and just dabbing in a little nose at the end of that snout with pure carbon black. Back to the paint palette, more carbon black. And here I'm adding the ear. Now the ear, it took me a little bit of research to figure out where exactly it was positioned. But on top of that layer, you'll even notice that neat carbon black mixes with the layer that's been placed on there previously. And so I have to build it up a little bit, a little dot for the eye. And I was keen to be anatomically correct. So the ear is set back very far on the head, and the eye is being positioned in a manner that fits the reference photo. I'm changing my rigger brush to a slightly smaller one. My water is actually water and linseed oil mix. It's water-soluble linseed oil from the Winsor and Newton range. And I've gone in with a smaller brush, a smaller rigger brush from Rosemary and Co. And the water mix is actually probably about 50-50 water and water mixable linseed oil. The colour I'm using is yellow ochre, which is a good approximate, but I'm dampening it down with a mix of light grey, and probably later on even lighten it up a little bit more with titanium white. But there we go. Tackling the head right now. And it's quite close. It could be a little bit more orangey in colour if I was painting a copy of the reference photo. But what I've got to remember here is that the Tamandua is being observed in a forest surrounded by dark. So I'm allowing myself a little bit of latitude there, but also bringing in the forearm of its right forearm with little gentle strokes towards the body, back to the head and neck. And I was deciding whether or not to include more of the photograph into the artwork itself. I'm working quite tentatively here because I want to build up the drawing and make sure that the colouring is respecting the research that's been done on trying to find out a little bit more about the anteater. We were lucky as a family to be able to visit Costa Rica. We didn't see the anteaters, but we were made well aware of them on our many trips. So if and when we go back, we'll have to make sure that we see a Tamandua, because they're a lovely animal, quite charming. Back into the yellow ochre on the palette. And I think around about this time, I decide that maybe the composition needs a little bit more. So you'll see later on, because I'm doing this voiceover retrospectively, that I include another arm. But now what I'm doing is I'm just feeling my way around about the shape of this creature here, trying to gently tease the colour in the direction of this kind of V-neck that I have leading up to the leading up to the tank top that they wear. And also deciding that, you know, this other arm, the Tamandua, is stretching its left forearm somewhere out into the jungle. Now, this is something that I've learned about Rousseau, is that the creatures are needed to break up the monotony of the greenery. And so it actually becomes quite easy later on to try and put in little hints of figures in between the gaps. So I noticed that when I was doing this, I thought, which area is overwhelmed by greenery, which area is a little bit dull, and what can I put in there to create a visual surprise or some detailing or something of interest for the viewer to find. So that is something that I learned about Rousseau's working methodology, is that with layering, you know, you can actually explore the spaces, and you know, the spaces kind of suggest the forms that could be lurking within them. And this one just, the Tamandua just needed to be included. My wife wanted the Tamandua. Here we go, in with carbon black, which is not suitable. I changed my mind a lot later on, and I do some painting post-video as well to try and correct it, because in my opinion it's a little bit too abrupt. It doesn't read very well, and so I tampered with the colouring to make it slightly more legible. I did that by putting it in some yellow ochre to nudge it more towards olive, and then I played around with some browns in there as well, and some sgraffito effect by scratching in kind of fur textures. But it took me a long time to get very happy with it. But here I'm just blocking in part of the tank top and creating a V for the neck. And back over to my palette. In with the rigger, in with the yellow ochre, and possibly working on the left leg. There we go. So it was necessary also not just to paint, you know, kind of flattened caricatures of the creatures that were being incorporated into the composition, but actually to render their form. And so I had to put in tints and tones of the different colours to try and suggest that the form had roundness. And so it's quite possible that I drag some of this yellow ochre and incorporate a little bit of light and in the form of titanium white, and a little bit of dark later on in the form of burnt umber, to try and give this illusion of light catching it, but as the form curves, the shadow kind of rotates into the darkness of the undergrowth. So it was a tricky little spot, but quite a charming character to paint. The other thing is, I notice in trying to paint in Rousseau's style that you can actually take an area and work on it as discrete sections. So instead of working on the whole painting all together at the same time, you can just say, right, today I'm going to concentrate on painting the Tamandua, and I'm going to give it my attention, and then I'll move on to something else. So you can work sequentially, and you can work in discrete areas separate from each other, and hope that in doing so you manage to make a whole production which is coherent and works together. So again, with this notion of rounding the form, creating highlights and shadow areas, I've gone into a mix of quite a lot of titanium white and a very little bit of dirt from the greys and the yellow ochre. And this is the reason why I allowed some of the staining colours like Diox purple to remain in my water mix, because the dirtiness of it tends to temper the colours and just make them work a little bit better. That was a lesson that I learned by studying the great Scottish artist John Bellany, and as part of my BA Honours, as my final exhibition, I tried to become Bellany and learn a lot from painting in his style and actually trying to be him for a period of time. And what I learned was work. You can work with a dirty brush and you can allow the colours to tone down and temper in that way. So my own tendency is to try and work with pure colours anyway. So working with dirted water or dirted water and linseed oil mix is a way of creating harmony within the colours and also dampening down on the rawness of the pure pigment. It's not a way of working all the time. Back into the carbon black, back into the yellow ochre. This will create a kind of olive colour. And perhaps just trying to get the shadow area under the neck. Another thing that I learned by studying John Bellany is look for the triangle. So whenever you're creating forms, Bellany always tried to look for the triangle. Now it's not perfect, but if you see the shadow area under the Tamandua's chin, I can see a fairly dark patch, but I can see an even darker, almost triangular patch. And so that's what I'm trying to bring out. And later on through this sequence, I do struggle to try and get that right. I get it satisfactory for the video, but I did want to try and perfect it a little bit off camera. It is a fairly unnatural thing to do, to actually paint and narrate at the same time. And I'm only narrating this post-production, post-filming, because the original voiceover didn't take for some reason, and so I'm going to be doing the whole series of these retrospectively. The carbon black yellow ochre mix, which is tending towards olive green but a very, very dark olive green, is being used to put the shadow on the thigh, rotating into the darkness of the undergrowth, as I mentioned. And now, instead of using an embossing tool, which is very, very good for pushing colour around and creating this kind of sgraffito technique, you can also use the handle of the brush. So I'm very keen, even though I'm working at roughly kind of A4 size, it's slightly bigger than A4, that even with these small figures like this Tamandua, I'm moving across the page for comparison, we still desire to build in those little details like the texture of fur. And here I'm kind of pointing out just how the Tamandua sits within there. The form it's partially clear. This is another joy of working in this way, is that the hands of the Tamandua are almost entirely missing. But because of the deep complexity of the forest round about it, that information is not lost. It works upon the imagination, and our imagination supplies the lack of information. So thank you so much for joining me in this episode. We will be back to deal with the sloth, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much for viewing. I hope you've learned something that inspires your creativity wherever you are.